The Song of Harmony Gulch. The melody spilled from the general store's open doorway, a vibrant thread woven through the dust-hazed afternoon. It was Dusty Rose's voice, clear and strong, carrying a tune that felt both old and brand new at the same time. Inside, sacks of flour and bolts of calico serve as a backdrop to the impromptu stage she'd claimed, a sturdy wooden crate usually reserved for apples. Dusty's worn boots tapped a rhythmic beat against the crate as her fingers danced over the strings of her battered guitar. Sunlight streamed through the window, catching the fiery glints in her auburn hair, a wild mane barely tamed by a faded blue ribbon. Her dress, a patchwork of floral prints and solid colors, swirled around her knees as she swayed to the music, her eyes closed, lost in the story she was telling. Harmony Gulch, a place we call our own, she sang, her voice rich with emotion, where the river whispers secrets and the wildflowers have grown. We face the sun together, though the shadows may creep near, for the song of Harmony Gulch will banish all our fear. A scattering of townsfolk filled the store, abandoning their shopping for a moment of respite. Old Man Hemlock, usually gruff and complaining, leaned against a shelf of canned goods, a rare smile softening his wrinkled face. Martha Bell, known for her sharp tongue and even sharper wit, hummed along, her hand unconsciously patting her knee in time with the music. Even young Timmy, notorious for his boundless energy and penchant for mischief, sat cross-legged on the floor, his eyes wide with wonder. Dusty's songs were like that. They had a way of reaching into your soul, of smoothing out the rough edges of a hard life. They spoke of hope and resilience, of the beauty that could be found even in the most desolate landscapes. They were the heart and soul of Harmony Gulch, as vital to the town's survival as water and sunlight. As the song ended, a ripple of applause filled the store. Dusty opened her eyes, a bright smile spreading across her face. "Thank you, folks," she said, her voice warm and genuine. "It always feels good to sing for you." "That it does, Dusty," Martha Bell called out, her voice surprisingly gentle. "Always puts a bit of sunshine in our day." "Indeed," Old Man Hemlock grumbled, though his smile remained. "Keeps us from forgetting what we're fighting for." Dusty grinned, her gaze sweeping across the faces of her audience. They were her family, her community, the people she loved. She knew their stories, their struggles, their hopes and dreams. And she poured all of that into her music, weaving it into the fabric of Harmony Gulch. Leaning against the doorframe, partially obscured by the shadows, stood Walt Rose, Dusty's father. He watched her with a mixture of pride and worry etched on his face. He knew how much her singing meant to her, how it was her way of connecting with the world and expressing the fiery spirit that burned within her. But he also knew the dangers that lurked beyond the borders of Harmony Gulch, the harsh realities that could crush a spirit as bright as hers. He saw the way men looked at her, not just with admiration, but with something else, something possessive and calculating. He'd seen that look before, in the eyes of the man who had tried to control his own late wife, Lily. And he feared that Dusty, with her naive heart and unwavering belief in the goodness of people, wouldn't be able to protect herself. He tried to talk to her about it, to warn her of the wolves in sheep's clothing. But Dusty was as stubborn as a mule. She refused to be caged, to have her spirit dimmed by fear. She believed that everyone deserved a chance, that even the most hardened hearts could be softened by kindness and understanding. Walt sighed, pushing himself off the doorframe and stepping into the store. "Dusty, honey," he said, his voice low, "can I have a word?" Dusty turned, her smile faltering slightly as she saw the worry in her father's eyes. She knew what was coming. Another lecture about being careful, about not trusting strangers, about staying close to home. "Sure, Pa," she said, setting her guitar aside. "What is it?" Walt walked over to her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Just wanted to remind you to be careful when you ride out to Widow Jenkins' place tomorrow. It's a long ride." Dusty rolled her eyes, but there was affection in her voice as she replied, "Pa, I've been riding out there since I was a little girl. I know the way." I know," Walt said, his grip tightening slightly. But things are different now, Dusty. There's unrest in the territory. Just promise me you'll be careful. Dusty looked at her father, her expression softening. She knew he was just worried about her, and she loved him for it. I promise, Pa, she said, squeezing his hand. I'll be careful. Walt nodded, his gaze still troubled. He knew that a promise from Dusty Rose was worth more than gold. But he also knew that her own sense of what constituted careful might not be the same as his. He just hoped it would be enough to keep her safe. A promise of gold. The saloon doors swung shut behind Walt, briefly muting the saloon's riotous piano. The reek of flat beer and stale tobacco clung to him, a scent as familiar as regret. In a shadowed corner, Silas Blackwood held court, a man built like a granite outcrop, his bull neck straining against a pristine collar. Flanking him were two sentinels, their faces unreadable. Boots crunching on the sawdust-strewn floor, Walt approached. Blackwood, he croaked. Silas's gaze lifted, muddy eyes assessing him with chilling calculation. No greeting was offered, just a thick finger jabbing towards an empty chair. Walt remained standing. Word reached me you wanted a discussion. Walt continued, his gaze darting between Blackwood and his watchdogs. A rumbling chuckle emanated from Silas's massive chest. Discussion is hardly the word, Rose. An offer, more like a damn generous one. He retrieved a weighty pouch from his vest, the leather worn slick and dark with age. It landed on the table with a muffled thump, momentarily silencing the ivories. Gold, Silas declared, his gaze unwavering. A king's ransom for the right acquisition. Walt's Adam's apple bobbed. He'd anticipated this moment since the arrival of Silas's messenger, but anticipation and reality tasted distinctly different. Dusty ain't for sale, Blackwood. Walt managed, a spark of defiance flickering in his voice. The smile vanished from Silas's face, replaced by a glacial stare. Everything comes with a price, Rose. Even your daughter's innocence. He leaned in, his voice a gravelly rasp. Don't insult my intelligence. I know you're drowning in debt. This could wash it all away, set you up on Easy Street. A fresh start. Or the threat hung unspoken like a blade in the air. Walt's fists clenched, his knuckles bone-white. He pictured Dusty, her sunny disposition, her music capable of coaxing melodies from stones. He couldn't deliver her to this predator. But the crushing weight of his obligations, the dread for his own skin, bore down, suffocating him. He was trapped between Scylla and Charybdis. How much? He rasped, the words bitter on his tongue. Silas's grin returned, exposing stained teeth. Enough to forget she ever existed. Enough to buy yourself a new life, far away from Harmony Gulch. He nudged the pouch closer. Consider this earnest money. The balance comes upon delivery. Walt's gaze locked on the pouch, the gold winking under the dim lights. Freedom, security, escape from the grinding poverty that had been his constant companion, all within reach. But so was Dusty's future, her joy, her very being. He squeezed his eyes shut, conjuring Dusty's face, her trusting eyes. He could almost hear her laughter, her songs echoing through the canyons. He couldn't do it. He wouldn't. Yet, the memory of the men he owed, their brutal reputation, the hungry way they'd looked at Dusty during their last visit, flashed before him. He remembered the fear etched on her face, the way she'd clung to him, begging for protection. He had failed her then. He couldn't fail her again. His eyes snapped open, his gaze resolute. What are your intentions toward her, Blackwood? Silas snorted derisively. Intentions? She'll be my wife, Rose. My chattel. She'll give me sons, manage my household, and obey my commands. Need you know more? A wave of bile rose in Walt's throat. He yearned to leap across the table, to throttle Silas with his bare hands. But he was a broken man, defeated by circumstance and his own failings. And if she objects? Walt whispered. Silas shrugged, dismissively. She won't. She'll do as her father directs. He paused, a cruel glint illuminating his eyes. Won't she, Rose? Walt dropped his gaze to the pouch, then back to Silas's pitiless stare. The enormity of his decision settled upon him. a crushing weight. He knew he was sentencing Dusty to a wretched existence, one she didn't deserve. Yet, he spun a justification, telling himself he was safeguarding her from something even more horrific. His hand trembled as he closed his fingers around the pouch. She'll marry you, he choked out. Silas's smile widened, a predatory display that chilled Walt to the bone. Excellent. I knew you were a pragmatist, Rose. We'll finalize the arrangements tomorrow. See that she's ready. Walt nodded, unable to maintain eye contact. He felt like he had traded his soul to the devil himself. And in a way, he had. He turned and stumbled toward the exit, the weight of the gold a leaden burden in his pocket, a constant reminder of the dreadful price he had just paid. Chains of defiance. The general store resonated with the languid pulse of a summer afternoon. Dusty rose, perched on a stool, offered a soft counterpoint to the floorboard's groan and the low thrum of shared secrets. Sunlight poured through the grimy windows, splashing amber hues across the fabric stacked high. Her voice, like spun sugar, rose in a voiceless air, a melody as familiar as the mingled scents of spice and timber that permeated the space. Walt, framed in the doorway, felt his gut clench with an acrid guilt. Townsfolk smiled at Dusty, their expressions softening at her song. She was the sunlight trapped in this weary town, a vivid stroke against a drab canvas. He'd always fretted over her, her naive heart, her innocent eyes wide in a world that devoured kindness and discarded the remains. That worry had been a persistent throb, a subtle discord beneath his love. Now, it surged like a riptide, threatening to pull him under. He cleared his throat, the sound a jarring intrusion in the peaceful air. Dusty's song ceased, her luminous eyes locking onto his. "Papa, is everything all right?" He moved toward her, each step burdened with dread. He averted his gaze. "Dusty," he began, his voice like gravel. There's something we need to discuss." She hopped down, a line creasing her brow. "What is it? You look unwell." He drew a breath, the air snagging in his throat. "Silas Blackwood. He's proposed. He wants to take you as his wife." The words settled, heavy and suffocating. Dusty's face remained blank for a moment. Then, comprehension bloomed into stark horror. "Marry? Silas Blackwood? But, Papa, he's old enough to be my grandfather." Walt winced. "He's a man of substance, Dusty. He can offer you security, a life free from want." He continued, rushing, desperate to sway her, and perhaps alleviate his own conscience. "He can settle my debts. We can finally be free of this burden." Her eyes widened, betrayal blazing within. You agreed to this? You promised me to him." Her voice trembled, a fragile thread. He couldn't bear her gaze. He fixed his attention on the worn planks, tracing their history with his eyes. "I did what I believed was necessary." "Necessary for whom? Papa? For you." Her voice gained an edge, sharpened with rising anger. "You sold me, as if our livestock to be bartered." He finally met her gaze, his own pleading for understanding. "It's not like that, Dusty. He'll provide for you. He'll give you everything you could desire." "Everything I could desire?" She gave a short, broken laugh. "I desire freedom, Papa. I desire to sing. I desire to shape my own destiny, not be traded to some grotesque man." "Don't speak of him that way." Walt snapped, fueled by his own fear and aching guilt. "He's doing us a kindness." "Kindness? By robbing me of my life? By trapping me in his gilded cage?" She glared, her slight figure trembling with resolve. "I won't consent, Papa. I won't marry him. You can't force me to." Walt's carefully maintained facade crumbled. He seized her arm, his grip constricting. "You will obey, Dusty. I've struck a bargain. You will not sabotage this." She wrenched free, her eyes burning. "I am not a possession to be bartered. I am a person, and I will not be coerced into a loveless marriage." He advanced, seizing her again. This time he held tight. "You are my daughter, and you will submit." He dragged her from the shop, ignoring her struggles and the shocked whispers of the remaining patrons. The sun seemed to mock him, its golden glow now harsh and accusing. He hauled her toward the wagon parked outside, the very wagon that had carried their hopes across the plains, the same wagon that now symbolized her captivity. Rifling through the wagon bed, his hands quivering, he produced a heavy iron chain. Dusty stared, her breath catching in her lungs. "Papa, please no." He dismissed her pleas, his face a rigid mask. He looped the chain around her ankle, the cold metal a cruel caress against her skin. He fastened the other end to the wagon wheel, the metallic clang echoing in the sudden void. Dusty gazed at the chain, her eyes wide with disbelief and agony. "You can't do this," she rasped, her voice cracking with tears. "I'm your daughter." Walt turned away, unable to face her. He mounted the wagon, the leather seat cold and unyielding beneath him. "I'm doing what must be done," he mumbled, the words ringing false even to his own ears. He snapped the reins, the wagon jolting forward. Dusty stumbled, the chain biting into her flesh. Her cry was swallowed by the rumble of the wheels. He didn't look back. He couldn't bear to. Under the desert sun. The desert sun hammered at Dusty, each ray a spike driven into her skull. The chain, once cool, now seared her wrist, a constricting brand that chafed with every twitch. Dust, churned by the infrequent wagon or scavenging cur, rasped in her throat, making each breath a parched agony. Chained to a wagon wheel in Harmony Gulch's parched center, she was a spectacle, a twisted mockery of a bride. Instead of blossoms, lace, or hope, there was only cold iron, searing mortification, and the pitiless glare. The townsfolk, normally so free with greetings, now averted their gaze, their pace quickening as they passed, faces rigidly forward. A mother clutched her son tighter, muttering reassurances. A knot of men outside the saloon fell silent, their laughter extinguished at the sight of her. They muttered, a low, formless murmur, before scattering. Dusty's eyes fell to the fractured earth. She sought to shut out the whispers, the pitying stares, the oven-like air. She grasped for memories, cool water, the scent of spring blossoms, anything to escape this torment. A fly, fat and lazy, buzzed her head, settling on her parched lips. She recoiled, but lacked the will to brush it away. What was one more violation? Hours bled into one another. The sun crested, then began its slow, fiery descent, painting the sky in violent hues. Shadows stretched, offering a brief surcease from the heat, but none from the shame. A girl, barely 5, approached with hesitant steps. A wilted blossom drooped in her fist, her eyes wide with mingled fear and empathy. She edged closer, stopping just beyond Dusty's reach. "Are you thirsty?" she breathed, her voice a thread against the wind. Dusty managed a weak assent. The girl vanished, darting back toward the general store. Moments later, she returned, bearing a dented tin cup brimming with water. She extended it, her small hands trembling. Dusty strained, her fingers brushing the girl's. Out of reach. "I can't," she rasped, her voice like cracked leather. The girl's face crumpled, tears brimming. She set the cup on the parched ground and fled, a sob escaping her lips. Dusty watched her go, another wave of despair crashing over her. Even a child's compassion was rendered useless by her father's pitiless edict. As twilight deepened, a different shadow enveloped her. A long, gaunt shape emanating from behind the general store. Silas Blackwood emerged into the fading light, his features obscured by the gathering gloom. He paused, regarding her with a dispassionate, almost scientific interest. Then a slow, triumphant smile bloomed on his face. He spoke no words. He didn't need to. His expression was a declaration. He had prevailed. He had crushed her spirit. He smoothed the lapels of his fine coat, the fabric shimmering even in the dimness. He was the picture of the prosperous landowner, the community's cornerstone. And she, chained and exposed, was merely a possession acquired. He turned and melted into the shadows. The smile burned into her memory like a brand. Dusty shut her eyes, his smug visage seared onto her eyelids. She would not break. She would not concede victory. She would unearth a means of escape from this horror, even if it was her final act. The sun had yielded to night, but a spark of defiance still glowed within her. She remained unbroken. Not yet. The stranger's arrival. Jedstone squinted against the sun's glare, Willow's hooves kicking up puffs of ochre dust as they entered Harmony Gulch. The air shimmered above the parched earth, a visual echo of the disquiet that had clung to him like a burr for days. The rumors had painted a grim picture, a community strangled by oppression, and what he saw validated every dark suspicion. Harmony Gulch was a study in discord. A heavy silence blanketed the scene, a collective breath held hostage. Buildings sagged, huddling together as if to escape the looming shadow of Blackwood Mercantile, a structure that dominated the town square. But it wasn't the mercantile itself that snagged Jed's attention. It was the young woman shackled to a ramshackle wagon directly before it. Her head was lowered, tangled strands of hair obscuring her face from the relentless sun. Cruel links of chain bound her wrists to the wagon wheel. Jed drew Willow to a halt, his gaze sweeping the faces of the townsfolk. They averted their eyes, shoulders slumped in a posture of fear and resignation. Dismounting, the rasp of his spurs on the dry ground shattered the stillness. A boy, perhaps 7 years old, stood nearby, clutching a drooping sunflower. He watched Jed with wide, apprehensive eyes. Jed knelt, meeting the boy's gaze. His voice, a low murmur, contrasted sharply with the arid surroundings. "What's going on here, son? Why is that woman chained up like that?" The boy hesitated, his gaze flickering nervously towards the mercantile. At last, he whispered, his voice thin as a spider's silk, "That's Dusty Rose, Mr. Blackwood. He's punishing her." "Punishing her for what?" Jed pressed, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. The boy swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing. Pa says she wouldn't have him, even though her pa owes Mr. Blackwood a heap of money. Jed's eyes narrowed, a muscle ticking in his cheek. A forced arrangement. He'd heard tales of such savagery in the lawless territories, but hadn't expected to encounter it here, in a place that dared to call itself Harmony. So, her father, he offered her as payment to Blackwood? The boy nodded miserably, the sunflower now hanging limply. Mr. Blackwood said it was a fair settlement. But Dusty, she wouldn't be bought. Said she belonged to no one. A spark of admiration ignited in the boy's eyes. Jed rose, his expression hardening as he turned towards the mercantile. A figure emerged from the building, a towering man with a cruel, downturned mouth. Silas Blackwood. He surveyed the scene, a glint of smug satisfaction in his eyes, his gaze lingering on Dusty Rose before fixing on Jed. Blackwood sauntered towards them, boots stirring up gritty dust. "Well now," he drawled, his voice a thick syrup of disdain. "Looks like we have company. Someone taking a little too much interest in my affairs." Jed met Blackwood's gaze, his own unwavering and direct. "She doesn't look like an affair to me," he said, his voice a quiet threat. "She looks like a woman imprisoned against her will." Blackwood chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. "She's defying her father, defying the way things are done. Needs to learn her place. And you believe chaining her like an animal is the way to teach her?" Jed's hand instinctively strayed towards the Colt Peacemaker riding low on his hip. The boy tugged at Jed's trouser leg, his eyes pleading. "Please, mister, don't rile him up. He'll only take it out on her." Jed glanced down, his expression softening imperceptibly. The boy was right. A head-on clash with Blackwood, here and now, would only worsen Dusty Rose's plight. He needed a different approach, a way to liberate her without endangering her or the rest of this downtrodden town. He faced Blackwood again, his voice even and controlled. "Just passing through," he said. "Just curious about this situation. I'll be on my way now." Blackwood regarded him with suspicion, but seemed satisfied with Jed's answer. "See that you do," he said, his voice a low growl. "And remember, some things are better left alone." Jed nodded curtly, then turned and mounted Willow. He spared a final glance at Dusty Rose, head still bowed, body still captive. He made a silent vow. He wouldn't abandon her. He would find a way to help her, even if it meant confronting Silas Blackwood himself. He guided Willow towards the edge of town, his mind already churning, seeking a way to shatter the chains that held Dusty Rose and the spirit of Harmony Gulch captive. A daring rescue. Jed Stone's jaw tightened as he watched Silas Blackwood saunter into the Golden Nugget Saloon, Walt, Dusty's father, trailing behind him like a whipped dog. He'd waited long enough. He pushed through the batwing doors, the scent of stale beer and cheap perfume hitting him like a physical blow. Blackwood, Jed's voice cut through the saloon's murmur. Silas turned, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. He sized Jed up, his gaze lingering on the worn leather of his saddlebags. Well, look what the cat dragged in. Another lovesick pup come to whine about the pretty songbird. He chuckled, a harsh, grating sound. Walt, you know this one? Walt shuffled his feet, avoiding Jed's gaze. Don't rightly know him, Silas. Just passing through, I reckon. Passing through with an opinion, it seems, Jed retorted, his voice dangerously low. I saw Dusty, chained in the square. That's no way to treat a human being, let alone a woman. Blackwood's smile vanished. That woman belongs to me. Or, she will soon enough. Her father made a deal, and she'll honor it. He gestured dismissively. Now, run along, rancher. This ain't your concern. It is now. Jed stepped closer, the saloon growing quiet around them. She doesn't look like she wants to marry you. Maybe you should let her go. Blackwood laughed again, louder this time, and several of his men moved to flank him. Let her go. And who's going to pay Walt's debts? You? I didn't think so. This is between me and the Roses. Now, I'm only going to say this once. Get out of my town. Jed knew he was outnumbered, outgunned, and probably outmaneuvered. A direct confrontation would be suicide. He needed a plan. Fine, he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. Didn't mean to cause any trouble. Just thought a word of reason might prevail. He backed away slowly, never taking his eyes off Blackwood, then turned and strode out of the saloon. The desert air felt cooler on his skin, a welcome relief from the stifling atmosphere inside. He found a secluded spot near the livery stable, watching the saloon from the shadows. He couldn't shake the image of Dusty, her spirit dimmed but not extinguished, chained to that wagon wheel. He wouldn't let her stay there. As darkness enveloped Harmony Gulch, Jed moved with the stealth of a seasoned tracker. The moon was a sliver in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows. He circled the town square, noting the positions of Blackwood's men, their silhouettes outlined against the flickering lamplight. A lone guard patrolled near Dusty, his rifle slung casually over his shoulder. He waited, the silence punctuated only by the creak of the wind and the distant howl of a coyote. Patience was a virtue he'd learned on the unforgiving plains. Finally, the guard stopped pacing, leaned against a building, and began to doze. Now was his chance. Jed moved swiftly, silently, melting into the darkness. He reached Dusty, his heart pounding in his chest. She was asleep, her face pale and drawn. He knelt beside her, gently shaking her awake. Her eyes fluttered open, widening in surprise and then fear. "Who? It's all right," he whispered, his voice low and urgent. "My name is Jed. I'm here to get you out of here." He pulled a small, hardened steel file from his pocket, a tool he always carried for just such occasions. It took agonizingly long, each scrape of metal against metal echoing in the stillness of the night. Finally, with a snap, the first chain broke. Then the second. The cold iron fell away, and Dusty gasped, rubbing her wrists. "Can you walk?" Jed asked, helping her to her feet. She nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "I think so." They moved quickly, silently, towards the edge of town, but the sound of the falling chains had alerted the guard. He yelled, a piercing cry that shattered the night's tranquility. "They know," Dusty cried, fear tightening her voice. "Run," Jed urged, grabbing her hand. They bolted, the sound of pursuing footsteps echoing behind them. Blackwood's men poured out of the saloon, their shouts and curses filling the air. They were gaining on them. Jed pulled Dusty towards the cover of the rocky terrain outside of town, praying the darkness would conceal them, praying that they could outrun Blackwood and his men. Their daring rescue had been discovered, and the chase was on. Sanctuary at Stone Ranch. The wind whipped Dusty's hair across her face, stinging her cheeks raw as they raced away from Harmony Gulch. Jed, astride a powerful chestnut mare, kept glancing back, his jaw tight with concern. Dusty clung to the back of his saddle, the rhythmic pounding of the horses' hooves a frantic drumbeat against the silence of their flight. The town, with its looming silhouette of Blackwood's imposing mansion, receded into the inky horizon. Each jostle sent a fresh wave of pain through her wrists, still tender from the chafing chains. Shame burned hotter than the physical ache. She, Dusty Rose, who had always preached freedom and independence through her music, was now reduced to a fugitive, a damsel rescued from a villain's clutches. The irony tasted like ash in her mouth. "Hold on, Dusty," Jed shouted over the wind, his voice rough with worry. "We're almost there." "Where is there?" she managed, her voice raspy. "Stone Ranch. It's my place. You'll be safe there." Safe. The word felt foreign, a luxury she hadn't allowed herself to consider since her father had bartered her away like a worn-out plow. Still, the thought offered a sliver of warmth against the biting wind. The landscape gradually transformed. The flat, dusty plains gave way to rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and the occasional gnarled oak. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. After what felt like an eternity, a cluster of buildings materialized in the distance. A modest house, a sturdy barn, corrals teeming with livestock. Smoke curled invitingly from a chimney. Jed slowed the mare as they approached, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "We're here." He dismounted, his movements swift and practiced, then reached up to help Dusty down. Her legs wobbled beneath her, unaccustomed to the movement after her days of confinement. Jed steadied her with a strong hand. The ranch house was small but solid, built of rough-hewn logs. A wide porch stretched across the front, offering a panoramic view of the valley below. Jed led her inside. The interior was simple and functional. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, radiating a welcome heat. A worn leather sofa sat in front of it, flanked by bookshelves overflowing with well-thumbed volumes. The air smelled of wood smoke and saddle soap. "Make yourself at home," Jed said, gesturing around the room. "I'll get some water heating for a bath. You look like you could use one." Dusty nodded, her gaze fixed on the fire. Its flickering flames danced in her eyes, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. She sank onto the sofa, the worn leather molding to her weary body. The silence of the ranch was a balm compared to the noise and malice of Harmony Gulch. It was a quiet that resonated with the land, a quiet that promised peace. Jed returned with a steaming kettle and a stack of clean towels. He busied himself preparing the bath in a large tin tub behind a makeshift screen in the corner of the room. Dusty watched him, a knot of gratitude tightening in her chest. This man, who barely knew her, was offering her sanctuary, comfort, and a chance to heal. "The water's ready," Jed announced, stepping away from the screen. "I'll be outside, tending to the horses. Don't hesitate to call if you need anything." Dusty slipped behind the screen, shedding her tattered dress with trembling hands. The water was blissfully hot, easing the aches and stiffness from her body. She scrubbed away the grime and humiliation of the past few days, feeling a small measure of renewal with each passing moment. Afterward, wrapped in a soft towel, she emerged from behind the screen. Jed had placed a simple cotton dress on the sofa for her to wear. It was plain and unadorned, but it felt like the most luxurious garment she had ever owned. As she dressed, she caught a glimpse of herself in a small, tarnished mirror hanging on the wall. Her reflection was a stranger, pale, gaunt, with haunted eyes. But beneath the surface, she saw a flicker of defiance, a spark of the woman she once was, and the woman she was determined to be again. Later, as dusk settled over the valley, Jed prepared a simple supper of stew and bread. They ate in silence, the only sound the crackling of the fire. Dusty found herself strangely at peace. The ranch felt like a world away from Blackwood and his twisted desires. But the peace was fragile. As she drifted off to sleep on the sofa, wrapped in a thick woolen blanket, she couldn't shake the feeling that their haven was temporary. Blackwood wouldn't let her go easily. He would come for her, and when he did, she knew she would have to be ready to fight. For her freedom, for her dignity, and for the right to choose her own destiny. The stand at Stone Ranch. A swirling plume of dust, like a brown leviathan, crawled across the horizon, announcing Silas Blackwood's impending arrival. From his perch on the porch roof, rifle in hand, Jed lowered his spyglass. "They're coming, Dusty." Looks like Blackwood brought half of Harmony Gulch with him. Dusty, standing beside him, her expression a mask of pale determination, nodded. The tender tips of her fingers, still stinging from relentless hours practicing with Jed's spare rifle, spoke volumes of her resolve. "You won't get me, Jed. Not again." Jed hopped down, landing soundlessly on the hard-packed earth. "He won't. We'll be ready." He squeezed her hand, the warmth a reassuring anchor against the encroaching tide of dread. "Remember the plan. A simple directive: hold the ranch." The preceding days had been a blur of fortifying the barn, erecting makeshift defenses, and a crash course in marksmanship for Dusty. Jed understood their disadvantage in numbers, yet he possessed an intimate knowledge of the terrain. Each hidden dip, jutting rock, every natural advantage Stone Ranch offered was etched in his mind. He had also dispatched messages to a few level-headed souls in Harmony Gulch, those not entirely enslaved to Blackwood's will. He held little hope for a response, but the embers of anticipation still glowed. The dust cloud billowed, the drumming of hooves growing into a thunderous roar. Jed placed Dusty behind a hasty barricade of hay bales near the house. "Stay low. Pick your shots." He settled himself behind the gnarled trunk of the ancient oak, a silent sentinel in the yard. The air crackled with tension, the only sound the frantic cadence of Dusty's pulse. A wave of men inundated the ranch, a ragtag assortment of disgruntled homesteaders, hired guns with eyes like chips of flint, and Blackwood's ever-present shadows, Clem and Earl. Blackwood, a sneer twisting his features, led the charge atop a magnificent black stallion. He halted a few yards from the house. "Jed Stone," his voice reverberated across the yard. "Turn over the girl, and I guarantee you and your land will remain untouched." Jed emerged from behind the tree. "Dusty Rose is a free woman, Blackwood. She's not yours to command." Blackwood's chuckle was a dry, grating rasp. "Free? She was promised to me. An agreement is an agreement, Stone. Don't force my hand." He nodded towards Clem and Earl, who dismounted, knuckles popping as they advanced. The silence became a suffocating blanket. Then a different sound, the unmistakable rhythm of approaching horses, but from the opposite direction. A small party of riders materialized from the trees bordering the eastern edge of the ranch. At their head rode Sarah Miller, the town's baker, her usually flour-dusted face set in a determined line. Behind her, a scattering of farmers, their shotguns raised, and old man Fitzwilliam, the retired blacksmith, wielding a time-worn hammer. "You're not the only one sick of your strong-arming, Blackwood." Sarah's voice, surprisingly forceful, cut through the air. "Dusty Rose deserves her freedom." A ripple of unease spread through Blackwood's ranks. Some looked uncertain, others plainly bewildered. Blackwood's face hardened into a thunderous scowl. "Traitors," he bellowed. "Clem, Earl, deal with them." Clem and Earl surged forward, but Jed reacted quicker. He fired a warning shot, the bullet spitting up dirt inches from their feet. "I wouldn't advise that." The standoff lingered, brief as a heartbeat, yet stretched into an eternity. Dusty, her pulse a frantic drumbeat, raised her rifle. A tremor ran through her hands, but her resolve remained unshakable. She was finished with running. Then a shot shattered the stillness. Not from Jed, nor from the townsfolk, but from Blackwood himself. The projectile zipped past Jed's ear, lodging itself in the ancient oak. "Fine. Blackwood spat, his voice dripping with venom. "Have it your way." The struggle for Stone Ranch had begun. A new harmony. The air crackled with gunfire, the acrid smell of gunpowder stinging Dusty's nostrils. She was tethered to the wagon wheel, the rough wood digging into her back as she strained against the chain. Blackwood's face, contorted with rage, was the last thing she wanted to see, but it was unavoidable. He barked orders, his voice a guttural snarl that barely masked the fear flickering in his eyes. "Get her off that wagon. She belongs to me," he roared, gesturing wildly at Dusty. But the townsfolk, emboldened by Sarah Miller's defiant stance, stood their ground. Jed, rifle raised, positioned himself between Dusty and the encroaching chaos, his gaze unwavering. The ranch hands, loyal to a fault, formed a protective line alongside him. The initial volley of fire had subsided into a tense exchange, punctuated by shouts and the whinnying of panicked horses. Dusty watched, her heart pounding, as Jed moved with a controlled ferocity she hadn't witnessed before. He was a whirlwind of action, deflecting blows, returning fire with deadly accuracy, all while keeping a watchful eye on her. She knew she had to do something, anything, to help. "Someone get me out of these chains," she yelled, her voice hoarse but determined. A young woman, barely more than a girl, darted forward, dodging bullets and swinging an axe she'd grabbed from a nearby shed. With desperate swings, she managed to sever the chain, freeing Dusty. Dusty didn't hesitate. She scrambled to her feet, grabbing a discarded pistol from the ground. She might not be a gunslinger, but she knew how to defend herself. She aimed at Blackwood's men, firing with a surprising steadiness, forcing them to take cover. The tide began to turn. Blackwood's posse, disorganized and lacking the townsfolk's unified resolve, started to falter. Sarah Miller, wielding a shotgun with surprising skill, led the charge, her voice ringing out. "Enough is enough. We won't be bullied anymore." Blackwood, seeing his advantage slipping away, became increasingly desperate. He broke through the line of men and lunged toward Dusty, a hunting knife glinting in his hand. Jed intercepted him, tackling him to the ground. A brutal fistfight ensued, a flurry of blows and grunts in the dust. Dusty watched, her breath caught in her throat, as Jed, fueled by righteous anger, delivered a final, decisive punch, knocking Blackwood unconscious. The remaining members of Blackwood's posse, demoralized by their leader's defeat, scattered and fled. The townsfolk cheered, their faces alight with victory. When Jed stood, brushing dust from his clothes, he looked at Dusty, a weary but relieved smile on his face. "It's over," he said, his voice rough. Dusty ran to him, throwing her arms around him. "Thank you, Jed. Thank you for everything." The next morning, as the sun rose over Harmony Gulch, a new sense of peace settled over the town. Blackwood, bruised and battered, was escorted out of town by Sarah Miller and a group of armed townsfolk, warned never to return. Life at the ranch slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, though forever changed. The fear that had gripped Dusty for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a growing sense of hope. She helped Jed with the daily chores, tending to the horses, mending fences, and learning the rhythms of ranch life. They worked side by side, their bond deepening with each passing day. Jed, no longer haunted by the shadows of his past, seemed lighter, more at peace. Dusty, freed from Blackwood's oppressive grip, rediscovered her joy in singing. Her voice, clear and strong, filled the valley once more. Songs of hope, resilience, and the promise of a brighter future. The melodies drifted through the open windows of the ranch house, reaching the ears of the townsfolk, a constant reminder of the freedom they had fought for and won. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Dusty and Jed sat on the porch, watching the horses graze peacefully in the pasture. "Harmony Gulch feels different now," Dusty said, leaning her head against Jed's shoulder. "It feels free." Jed put his arm around her, pulling her closer. "It is, Dusty. It is." The ranch became a haven, a place where kindness and compassion reigned. Dusty and Jed welcomed anyone in need, offering food, shelter, and a helping hand. The townsfolk often gathered at the ranch, drawn by Dusty's music and Jed's quiet strength. They shared stories, laughter, and dreams of a better future. A future where everyone was treated with respect and dignity. As Dusty sang, her voice carrying on the evening breeze, she knew that Harmony Gulch was finally living up to its name. The valley echoed with a harmony of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of the human spirit.